Canada's two major railway companies are tightening their safety standards in the wake of the tragedy in Lac-Mégantic. On July 6, a runaway train, as we all know, derailed in that small Quebec town. It exploded. It killed 50 people. 42 bodies have now been recovered from the wreckage. 8 people are unaccounted for and presumed dead. The accident has made international headlines. Just this afternoon, the U.S. President Barack Obama wrote to the town to express his condolences. Investigations into what exactly caused the disaster are ongoing. But in the meantime, the Canadian Pacific Railway and the Canadian National are already taking action. We have to know why. They've announced today some of these. Take a look. One, if a train must be left unattended, all doors and windows will be locked. They're strengthening brake setting procedures. The reverser, which is like a gear shift for trains, will be removed from the control stand when trains are stopped. The train can't go forward or backward without it. And CP says any of their trains containing regulated commodities like oil will not be left unattended on mainline tracks anymore. So why are companies like CN and CP acting faster than Transport Canada? The government has said repeatedly they're going to wait to act until a report is out. Is the government acting quickly enough? Should it fall on rail companies to review their own safety practices? Let's find out. In Toronto, MP Mark Adler from the Conservative Party is here. In Vancouver, the NDP Natural Resources critic Peter Julian is here. And with me in studio, Liberal Northern Development critic Yvonne Jones joins me. Good to see all of you.
Great to be here.
Mark Adler, the government has repeatedly told us on this program that they're going to wait to change regulations for Transport Canada's investigation. But Transport Canada has told us that could take a year or more. Why are the train companies moving faster than the government?
Well, let me tell you something, Evan. Let me preface my comments by saying, our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with the people where this tragedy happened in Lac-Mégantic. But, Evan, these changes were being anticipated by the railway companies. These are regulations that are coming down the pike, and the railway companies, not necessarily acting in advance of what the government plans in terms of regulation. These companies know that these regulations are coming, so they are acting in advance of us bringing down the regulations.
So wait, wait a second, this is important. You're saying these regulations are coming, so you're telling us today that the regulations on trains are actually coming, and they've just preempted the government. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and it's this is just good business for them. They have to abide by the regulations that we put down as a government. Now,
sorry, can you give us some details? When did the government decide on these new regulations? Who have you talked to? And
well,
are these regulations you're not waiting for Transport Canada?
Well, the regulations are not out yet, but they're anticipating the regulations coming out. Now, let me be clear. This accident, this tragedy that happened is a huge tragedy that has occurred. And our government, of course, is waiting for the investigation of the Quebec Provincial Police and the Transportation Safety Board. It's under full investigation, and we will act promptly on whatever those recommendations are.
But you're also saying you've already got regulations. I just want to be clear.
Well, these regulations that will be coming down,
the train companies' announcements today are the same regulations that you're saying the government's going to make anyway. So why not just make them?
Well, we will be making them. These are just companies acting in good business and anticipating that the regulations are coming. Now, these regulations are coming notwithstanding what has happened in Quebec. These are regulations that are coming down because our primary concern is the safety of Canadians. And we're constantly vigilant in terms of what would make Canadian railways safer for our Canadian citizens.
Okay, so I know I got these other questions, but Mr. Adler, you're saying that these regulations are not coming because of Lac-Mégantic. So are you saying the government knew the regulations weren't good enough, they didn't happen, you didn't bring them forward even though you knew that you were going to, and then the tragedy in Lac-Mégantic happened?
No, Evan, you're saying that. I'm not saying
that.
Well,
you said you did. No, actually, you said, just to be fair, you said that this wasn't because of Lac-Mégantic.
This was not because of Lac-Mégantic. These regulations have been in the works for some time now. And the companies that have been anticipating these changes in regulations, let's keep in mind, we don't stand still. We are concerned about the safety of Canadians. That's first and foremost in our minds. And as a result, we are constantly reviewing and revising our regulations in terms of train safety. And in this instance, the companies, in good business sense, are doing these regulations because they want their obviously their rolling stock to be as safe as possible also.
Okay, let me bring in Peter Julian and Yvonne Jones. Peter Julian, what do you make of this?
Evan, I just see complete confusion on the Conservative side. I mean, this is a government that hasn't implemented previous recommendations brought forward by the Transportation Safety Board. They ignored the recommendations brought forward by the Commissioner in the Environment on accidents involving dangerous goods. So we have a government that has simply refused to be responsible in any way when it comes to rail safety.
Sorry, Peter Julian, let me just interrupt you. I asked that very question to the head of the investigation for the Transportation Safety Board, and she said over 90% of their recommendations when it comes to rail have been implemented by the government, to be fair.
But not all of them, and that's the point that we're looking at today, is that we have a situation of tragedy in Lac-Mégantic that is beyond words. And we have some companies that obviously are moving to fill a void because the federal government has been irresponsible in this regard. Now we're hearing from the Conservatives that maybe they had some regulations that they were planning on bringing forward when they haven't fully implemented past recommendations that very clearly are a matter of concern to the public.
So let me just be clear with
confused.
you though. Are you suggesting there's a link between LAC regulations and the accident in Lac-Mégantic, something that your leader, Tom Mulcair, had said? So are you making that link?
What we have been saying is that the increase in the number of accidents involving dangerous goods and the increase that we've seen tragically in terms of fatalities as well is something that we think is linked to the lack of oversight from this federal government. They've actually cut back on funding to rail safety at a time when there is an increased number of movement of dangerous goods and an increase in the number of fatalities we've seen in the rail system over the last couple of years.
Although there have been a decrease in the number of derailments. All right, let me just get to Yvonne Jones, to be fair here. Mark Adler saying the government was going to bring down these regulations anyway before Lac-Mégantic, and they're doing them. They will, apparently now we know, they will be coming anyway. The train companies have now adopted them. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, our sympathies go out to the people of Lac-Mégantic, I mean, as do everyone across the country. This is a very tragic event, and I don't think it's an event that should be politicized. I think it is one where we should wait for the proper investigation, the proper experts to make the recommendations that are required to ensure safety on the railways. And as a government, then we should act responsibly.
How long are you willing to wait? Trains are still running. The train companies are obviously feeling that it's necessary to make changes. There must be people trains are running through their towns that they're concerned.
Absolutely.
How long would your party be prepared to wait before anything changed?
Well, they have to move very quickly. This is not something that you can delay for 3, 4, or 5 months. I mean, this is a tragic event that have affected so many people and is continuing to affect people who are using the rail system across Canada. The Harper government today should be saying to Transport Canada, we need to know what your investigation is producing. They should be saying that to the police today, and they should not just be acting in anticipation, but they should be acting with as much factual information as they can pull together. And that's not what we're seeing.
But if the companies are saying we're going to get rid of the handbrake rules, they're going to make these changes to unattended cars, shouldn't Transport Canada be on that? Why wait for an investigation that could take months and months, maybe even a year?
Well, what we're seeing the companies do today is basically a response, obviously, to the accident that have occurred. There's no doubt about that. But in addition, these companies are saying to the Canadians, we recognize that we did not meet the best safety standards that we could have. So today, in the absence of any investigation, in the absence of any recommendations, we are going to move forward and put these recommendations into play immediately. But there's no reason here for Transport Canada to delay. There's no reason for the police to delay, and there's absolutely no reason for the government of Canada to delay.
Mark Adler, would you say, now that you're telling us that the government's going to bring down new regulations, and you've been contemplating it for a long time, is this an admission that the rail transport system has not been safe enough?
Well, let me tell you,
the government knew it and was concerned about their lack of regulation. And if you had brought in some of these regulations sooner, maybe, and I don't know if the causal link here, the tragedy could have been averted.
Well,
is there an admission that it wasn't safe enough?
Well, let me just tell you, Evan, that What I'm telling you is that our government has put in $100 million to increase rail safety. We have also hired more inspectors. We have increased the fines for those companies that are in violation of the regulations. And we have put in whistleblower legislation. We have done more in this aspect than any other government in Canadian history to make our rail system safer and safer for Canadians. Now, let me just tell you that.
But the question was, if you're going to bring in new regulations, and before Lac Mégantic, are you saying that the regulations weren't strict enough to bring rail safety?
Evan, what I'm telling you is that there is an investigation going on currently by the Quebec Provincial Police, by the National Transportation Safety Board, and we will find out, once we have the facts in the fullness of time, that our government will act on those recommendations. Now,
but you will bring regulations out before. When will the regulations that you're talking about come out?
Well, they will come out when the Minister of Transport decides for them to come out. But what I'm telling you is that we work closely in terms of, we're a very consultative government, and we work very closely with the industry. The industry has decided, in this instance, anticipating that these regulations are coming, to actually implement them. So they will be ahead of the curve. That's just good business, Evan. But let me tell you once again that we must wait for the investigation of these investigative authorities to find out exactly what the cause of this accident was, so we can have respect, the proper respect given to these people. We cannot play politics with the tragedy, this human tragedy that happened in Lac Mégantic, as we have seen the NDP
I got a minute
do.
left. I want to just make sure everyone's got a voice here. Yvonne Jones and Peter Julian. Peter Julian, any response to that?
I'm just left flabbergasted, Evan. We have supposedly Transport Canada and the federal Conservative government working on regulations because they knew that the regulations weren't adequate. They're now saying, the Conservatives are saying, that some companies have moved forward with changing the regulations, beefing them up, making them tougher, making families, hopefully, and communities more secure. But you've got other companies that aren't involving this. And listening to Mr. Adler, I'm just left completely perplexed. If what he is saying is the companies that aren't putting in the higher levels of safety standards can basically keep going the way they are, even though supposedly some regulations were prepared, and some companies will follow these proposed new regulations and some won't. This is not the kind of clarity that Canadians need from coast to coast to coast.
I got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'm just astounded to learn that the federal government actually had recognized that there was some safety deficiencies within the railway regulations, and I'd like to know how long they've been sitting on this information, why they've not enacted the regulations sooner, and especially in wake of this particular tragedy that has happened in Lake Mégantic. If they have regulations to roll out, why not be rolling them out? I mean, it is unfounded today that a government could sit there and say, we know that there's been problems with safety in our railways. We've recognized that. We have regulations that we've drafted. We're looking at implementing them, but we can't tell you when we're going to do it. That's not good enough. If you know something, disclose it, put the proper regulations in place. It's their responsibility to do that.
This is an important debate. We're going to keep having it, obviously, as the investigation continues on in Lac Mégantic. Mark Adler, Peter Julian, Yvonne Jones, appreciate having all three of you here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.